U.S. Navy history arriving. Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I'm joined by the XO, the man with the plan, Christoph.
Hello, Dale. Thank you very much for having me here again. And listeners, thank you for being here again, or for the first time.
Absolutely. We love having you, whether it's your first time, your second time, your 100th time. Well, not 100. Is it 100th time? I think we're over 100.
Well, I will count repeat listens to their favorite episodes, and so maybe they're in the thousands, potentially.
Yeah, actually, listens are in the thousands.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so we thank you guys. We love you. Shall we talk about the Navy?
Yes.
So where we last off last time, we are in the Revolutionary War, and we were just about to get into the naval aspects of the war. So shall we get underway?
Absolutely, yes.
So when the war begins, the British had overwhelming naval superiority over, everybody. They were the number one navy in the world, even though that their fleet was old and run down. They would actually blame this on a guy named Lord Sandwich. And he was at this time the first Lord of the Admiralty.
Is that the Earl of Sandwich? Inventor of the sandwich?
Actually, this is John Montagu, 4th Earl of Sandwich.
I know one of the Earls of Sandwich definitely invented the sandwich, supposedly because he was such a compulsive gambler that he refused to leave the card table to have a meal, and so he told his servant, hey, just put some stuff between some bread and bring it on down, and that is our sandwich. Thank you, gambling.
That is actually very, very correct. That is the rumor. It was named after Lord Sandwich at the gambling table. And because John Montagu was the Earl of Sandwich, others began to order, quote, the same as Sandwich. And that's when the sandwich was born.
Huh. Isn't that wild?
But, I mean, that's also all rumor because we don't know exactly what the heck happened.
I understand.
So, during the first 3 years of the war, the Royal Navy was used mostly to transport troops for, the land war. And they were also used to protect commercial shipping. As, navies are still used in modern times. The Americans had no ships of the line, and they relied extensively on privateering to harass the British. So at this point in time, my audio got a bit messed up, so unfortunately we are missing a piece here. I'm sorry, everybody. Back to the show.
Last you spoke, John Paul Jones, and I said he was an awesome dude, father of the U.S. Navy.
Yeah, he became the first great American naval hero when he captured the HMS Drake on April 24th of 1778, which was the first victory for any American vessel in British waters.
That's quite an accomplishment, especially when, at this point, the UK is so dominant.
Yes. During the second period, the successive interventions of, France and Spain, and the Netherlands, it extended the Navy war until it was being fought from the West Indies to the Bay of Bengal.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that big of a scope.
Yeah, it was huge. Our little spat with the English covered a huge amount of area. This included operations that had already been being fought in America for, protecting the commerce, and naval campaigns on a huge scale carried out by the fleets of the rest of the maritime powers. In Europe, Spain entered the war as a friend to France with the goal of recapturing Gibraltar and Minocora. And that because it had been captured by the Anglo-Dutch force in 1704. So they were like, this is a perfect opportunity to get this stuff back. So they besieged Gibraltar for more than 3 years.
Wow.
And the British just stayed there very stubbornly and actually got resupplied twice. Well, they were resupplied once after a guy named Admiral Rodney and his victory over Juan de Langara in the 1870 Moonlight Battle. And then when Admiral Richard Howey came in 1782, the efforts by the Franco-Spanish friendship to capture Gibraltar were unsuccessful in the end.
What an incredibly defensible position. Gibraltar has, yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
They did have one success during that time. That was when they captured Minorca, and Spain kept it after the war. They did have some ambitious plans. They were planning an invasion of Great Britain in 1779.
Wow.
But, it did not happen. So we're going to talk about some European naval battles. We're going to first talk about the North Channel Naval Duel. It was a one-ship-on-ship battle between the USS Ranger and the HMS Drake. The guy in charge of the Ranger was John Paul Jones. And the guy on the English side in command was George Burden.
Burden? Like, I have too many burdens in my life and I must free myself of them? Burden?
Yes, it's such a burden to be English.
Well, I keep thinking about the history of English last names like Cooper or Smith. They're related to the professions that you had. Fletcher. Burden, I'm trying to associate that with, hey, that's just my job. I'm the town burden.
Well, it is spelled with a U instead of an E.
Okay, well,
but
that's better.
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think I'd rather be a Burdon than a Burden.
So as I hinted to you before, the American Revolutionary War was not confined to soil. Even, before we had foreign powers to help us. And these were done both by the Continental Navy and the privateers. For example, American captains had been making raids into British waters, capturing merchant ships, which they took into French ports. Even though France was neutral, they still take them over there and sold them off. So the Ranger, which was a Continental Navy sloop of war, sailed from Brest on April 10th of 1778 and headed for the coasts of the Solway Firth. This is where he had first learned to sail, to be as a little fun little trinket of information. He had an unsuccessful attempt to raid the port of Whitehaven in Cumberland between April 17th and 18th during the night, and he started harassing shipping in the North Channel.
I heard that he was unsuccessful with that raid because basically his crew got drunk. Like they're like, "Hey, we're here, we can destroy all these ships," but they're like, "Oh, look, there's a pub." And then that was the evening.
I believe you are correct.
One of the few attacks on British soil, which I thought was very interesting. They weren't previously invaded for like centuries before until John Paul Jones showed up.
Yeah, until these damn American upstarts.
Right.
On April 20th to 21st, during that night, the Ranger entered Belfast Lough in Northern Ireland. They had planned to seize a Royal Navy ship moored off of Carrickfergus, which was the HMS Drake. He was unsuccessful and returned to Whitehaven, and he did achieve the first key target of his mission, though, which was landing a large party at the harbor during the night of April 22nd to 23rd, and setting a merchant ship on fire. So those of you who play the U.S. Navy history podcast drinking game, drink arson.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
They followed this up within a couple hours with another raid at the Scottish seashore mansion of the Earl of Selkirk near Kirkcudbright. And by the time everybody had learned that there had been raids on English soil, the Ranger was already sailing away.
What? That's super bold. I mean, I just keep thinking about that situation. It's like, hey, yeah, they're the most powerful navy in the world, but I don't like them, and so I'm going to sail into their port and burn their ships, and then I'm out of here. That's just incredible.
Yeah. So John Paul Jones, he actually recruited his crew by an advert, and it promised them the opportunity to make their fortune, as they said back then, which it was actually a goal that could be achieved by privateering against the British, the merchant ships at least. But because Ranger was a Navy vessel and not a privateer, more British ships had been sunk on the missions than captured. This was to avoid diverting too many crew members to the captured ships and have them sail them back to France. Because once you get back to shore, they may not come back.
Oh, yeah.
And, to a small extent, Jones was actually a failure as a Navy commander, because the crew blamed him for what they thought was a strategic error, which allowed a British customs vessel to escape after being fired on. So this motivated him to capture a Royal Navy ship from its moorings. But, of course, it's a naval ship, not a cargo vessel. So it didn't have any cargo that could be sold for profit. So that did not bolster the crew to his purposes, because they had no cargo. They only have trained sailors with guns.
I would dare say that's the opposite of what they were looking for.
Yeah. So just after dawn on April 24th, Jones published... Well, there was an account that Jones published in his French autobiography about April 24th. Quote, "I ran a great risk of being killed or thrown into the sea," because, he was ticking off his crew.
Uh-huh.
But, the crew, it wasn't really too good for them right now anyway, because of the wind and the tide. It pretty much prevented them from leaving anyway. But they were watching the Drake with their little spyglasses. And so it showed them that they might not have to go back to Carrickfergus at all, because the boat was preparing to leave port.
Oh.
So the truth is, the Drake was getting ready to go after the Ranger ever since the Ranger came and paid them the visit for the first time. They took on volunteers from the Carrickfergus area and blustered the crew from 100 to around 160.
That's a lot. How big was this ship? Was this like a sloop or a...
Yeah, it was a sloop of war. She had 20 guns, but officially only had 16, but they got her up to 20.
Okay, that's a lot of guys on that one ship.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do not have a picture of her. But here is a picture of the Constellation, which was a Navy sloop of war. So that might give you a little bit of an idea of what this thing would have looked like. It might help if I hit the enter button so you could see it.
I can see it. Nice. That's a lot of guns.
Yes. Now, a lot of these extra crew members were actually not sailors. They were quote unquote landsmen. So they were going to be used for close quarter combat. In other
Got
words,
it.
boarding action. But also, they had another problem when they brought all these guys on. The acting gunner said that there was not enough cartridge paper to make up ammunition for all of these extra guys. And a lot of guys had guys on the Drake were actually sick. They were missing their gunner.
Oh,
They were missing their master's mate, and they were missing their boatswain. And he was actually shot dead, so he was never coming back. And they all were also missing a lieutenant, and he was also dead. He died of a fever a couple of days earlier. And the captain, George Burden, was actually reported to be in poor health. So he was there, but he was sick. But, this is the Royal Navy. We can't let all these little things stop us.
that's right. Mere inconsequential events to the greater purpose of the glory of the king.
Yes. So after an hour, a boat was sent to get a closer look at the Ranger. And this may have possibly been a key turning point in history. Jones opted to try a small change of the plan that he used to try to capture the custom vessel a couple days earlier. He hid most of the crew and his big guns and just act like he was some dumb fisherman.
Where do you hide guns like that on a ship like that?
Very carefully.
Oh, yeah, I guess. There we go.
Depending on whether these guns were just on the top deck, if they're just on the top deck, you just move them back so they're out of sight. Maybe cover them with like a tarp or something.
Oh, I see. It's not like they're being inspected on ship. They're just
Right.
passing by. That makes sense.
And if they were like below the main deck and they had gun ports, you just bring them back and seal up the gun ports, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah. Then it's just these doors are for decoration, no more.
Mm. But unlike with the customs vessel, this worked. And the crew of the reconnaissance boat were captured. And this actually helped the morale of the Americans. And one of the prisoners mentioned a large number of volunteers that had gone aboard the Drake. They were like, oh, we got like 60 more fighting men. Ha ha. You can't take the Drake. Oh, thank you for giving us that very important information.
Yes.
So the Drake starts getting underway, moving very slowly out across the loch. And there was a bonus for the British. At around 1300, a small boat came out carrying more volunteer. At least one more volunteer. It was a Royal Navy lieutenant named William Dobbs. He brought with him a copy of a letter from Whitehaven explaining the details of this mystery ship that they had been looking at. So now they know that that's the Ranger. So the wind and tides start to become more favorable in the afternoon. And so the Ranger moves slowly out of Belfast Loch into the North Channel. And they were just leading the Drake. They were not trying to leave. They were trying to lure them into more favorable conditions.
Makes sense. I mean, it's all strategy, right? You want to set yourself up for the best possible position that you can.
Yeah.
Let's see how it goes.
So at about 1800, they were within hailing distance, so they could shout at each other. Jones, he had American naval colors flying, and that meant that Dobbs was telling the truth. This was an American ship.
Yeah.
So this duel would be considered a small-scale dress rehearsal for the battle, for Jones's battle with HMS Serpius. in the next year. Drake had been built as a merchant ship with defensive capability, and it was brought to the Royal Navy to help fill in the gaps when, all those ships started being sent to the U.S. The hull was actually the wrong shape for rapid battle maneuvers, and the hull was not designed to resist cannon fire at all.
Oh, no.
Now, the Ranger, on the other hand, had been built to fight, and it was actually modified by Jones for maximum efficiency, as he called it. There were ports for 20 guns, but he found it safe to only assault 18 6-pound guns. So he found out that, if I put in those extra 2, this is going to really screw me up. So he had a total broadside weight of 54 pounds. And the Drake had a total broadside weight of 40 pounds. So the Ranger is bigger.
It seems like a decidedly better ship in every capacity. Like it has a hull that's built to take cannon fire, more guns, it's heavier. What am I missing something? I guess just the British have potentially more experience.
The British would have potentially more experience, and also they have about 60 extra guys.
Yeah.
So if they could grapple and board the Ranger, that would be a lot of trouble for John Paul Jones. So now that the formalities are completed, we see you're the enemy, let's fight. The Ranger, she makes a sharp turn and fires a broadside into the Drake, who was following them. Now, the British are not able to reply with their own broadside immediately. But when they did, they found out they had a very serious problem. They found out that when they put in a full charge of powder, their guns were unstable.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they tended to tip forward. And in the case with the pairs of guns at the aft end of the ship, a lot of them were subject to the rise and falls of the waves, which means that they could skid almost anywhere as they were fired.
Oh my gosh.
Which means that this prevented a lot of mortal danger to the gun crews.
I'm guessing at some point, I don't know what the protocol would be, but I'm guessing once you see those guns are unstable, you just don't use them, right? It's not like, or do you just try to power through and move it such that they can be used, but potentially utilizing more men? And that sounds like no pun intended, like a burden either way.
Yeah, it's you don't quit. You can't quit. You're in a fight for, your life. There's a phrase we use in the modern military: work the problem. In other words, you figure out what the problem is and you fix it, and you stay in the fight.
Adapt, overcome.
Adapt and overcome could work too, but we call it working the problem.
Okay.
Now the original gunner may have known about these problems, and maybe the gunners made as well, but neither of them were aboard the Drake. They were sick. One was sick,
Right.
and the other one had been captured. Was one of the ones that captured earlier in the day. After a couple more broadsides, they found more problems. Shrapnel from Ranger's third broadside hit Lieutenant Dobbs in the head, taking him out of the battle. The conditions on the Drake's gun deck were so bad and unpredictable that the powder monkeys eventually stopped wanting to do their job. These were the boys that brought charges of gunpowder up for the cannons in fire-resistant boxes.
And back in this time, most of those on both sides, they were pretty much manned by preteens or young teenagers, correct?
Yeah, these were boys.
Yeah.
Twice the ship's master had to go below to urge the acting gunner to be more efficient in supplying powder, because opportunities for more broadsides were starting to be missed. They'd come up within range of the broadside and nothing would fire. Well, if you don't got powder, you can't shoot nothing.
Oh, for sure, yeah. But that's a bad situation.
They also had another problem, which was that the slow matches, which is what they used to fire the guns, kept falling into their safety tubes and going out. But they also found that their 4-pound guns could not penetrate the Rangers' armor anyway. So Drake tried copying the technique the Americans had been using from the beginning. They aimed at the masts, sails, and riggings to, try to cripple her and they could run away or come in and board. They did get together, or they did get close together, but never close enough to be able to be grappled. Probably because Jones knew of the extra 60 guys waiting just for that to happen. But in addition to the cannons, each side was firing small arms at each other. And the Drake didn't do very good at that either. Remember the cartridge paper issue I told you about earlier?
Yes.
Yeah. They didn't find any more.
That's a problem.
So, yeah, they pretty much ran out of cartridge paper pretty quickly. So that meant that they also had to load their guns the slow way, pouring in the right amount of powder, putting in the shot, stamping it down. So they were passing around musket balls in the armorer's hat. And they only had 2 powder horns to share between all of the guys.
Oh my gosh, that is not good.
No. So all of this means that the Americans were, of course, much better organized.
Mm-hmm.
And it tipped the power in the Americans' direction. Drake did succeed in killing one guy. They killed a guy named Lieutenant Samuel Wallingford by musket.
Ooh.
Then they did have 2 guys who died from falling from the masts. But that's part of that's just part of sailing at that time.
Right.
The Drake lost 4. Captain Burden himself, he was struck in the head by a musket ball. So now that the captain and lieutenant are out of action, Drake was now under the command of the master, a guy named John Walsh. So now the Drake's sails and rigging are in tatters because of Rangers' broadsides. The masts and yard arms are seriously damaged as well. So the sloop is now pretty much dead in the water. She can't even turn to bring her broadside to bear. So now she's DIW. She cannot load her guns fast enough. And the small arms fighters are now, pretty much retreating to cover because what are they going to do?
Yeah. They're sitting ducks.
Yeah, there's only about a dozen people left on Drake's main deck. After the captain was dead, the 2 remaining petty officers on deck went to the master and advised him that they need to strike their colors and surrender. And after, talking with them about it for a couple minutes, he was like, you know what? You're right.
So when you say talking to the master to strike the colors, I understand that is to raise the white flag and surrender. But who is the master? Is he the traditional person that would decide that or do that?
First of all, striking the colors does not mean putting up the white flag. That means just taking down your colors to signal surrender.
Oh, okay.
You don't fly anything. The master is the master of the boat. It is a position on the ship.
I see.
Pretty high-ranking position.
Yeah, I imagine. Would they normally have gone to the captain to make this decision?
Yeah, well, the captain's dead.
Right, yeah. In
That's
this case,
why
I
they went to the
why.
master, because he's the one in command now.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. I mean, for the listeners.
Yes. Now, when they went to strike their colors, they found that their colors had already been shot away. So Mr. Walsh shouted and waved his hat instead. We surrender! Cease fire! This This fight, according to John Paul Jones's logs, lasted 1 hour and 5 minutes. So 35 men were sent from Ranger to the Drake to take charge and assess the damage. And the next 3 days were spent making repairs while they drifted slowly northwest between Ireland and Scotland. A cargo brig came close, and the Ranger captured them too.
Whoa.
And they used that as extra accommodation. They had previously captured 6 Irish fishermen on the first expedition. They allowed them, along with 3 sick Irish sailors, to take a boat and go home.
That's nice. I mean...
Yeah. And they didn't leave empty-handed. They got some sails from the Drake, and Jones gave them some money.
Oh.
Yeah. When they got back, they reported the concern that Jones was showing for Lieutenant Dobbs because he was still in a real bad way.
He's the one that got shrapnel in his head, right?
Yes. And while all this was happening, the Royal Navy had sent out proper warships to chase them down. But even though, Drake was really messed up, they actually never caught sight of these 2 boats slowly sailing away. The only real problem Jones had was that he put in charge of the Drake a guy named Lieutenant Thomas Simpson. And at one point during the voyage, they sailed out of sight.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, the news of this battle reached France much faster than Jones did, and the Americans were welcomed as heroes. As for the British, they had learned a lesson here. They learned that the Royal Navy could not defend British shipping against American raiders. It could not defend British coasts against American raiders.
Yeah.
It could not even defend its own fighting vessels against American raiders. They learned that they were not the top dogs anymore. Militia regiments were quickly redeployed to the coastal areas. They equipped seaports with artillery to defend themselves against further raids. And they pretty much banded together a lot of volunteers as a last line of defense. And from then on, the press paid very close attention to John Paul Jones. He was, at this point in time, there were starting to be rumors of murder and piracy from him.
Oh. All lies. Vicious slander, I say as an American.
Yeah. And when he got back to France, though, he wrote a kind and thoughtful letter to the Earl of Selkirk and to the family of Lieutenant Dobbs, who had unfortunately passed away a couple of days after the battle. But at this time, John Paul Jones has now gone from being an obscure Scottish American, go Scottish Americans, to a international star.
Wow.
And this demonstrated that the world's most powerful nation was as vulnerable to attack as any other.
And that's an important message to send to, I'm sure this really lifted the Dutch, French, and Spanish.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's like, look, the English aren't impervious. This little ragtag rebel group was able to soundly defeat the British.
Right.
So, yeah, that's very, very bad for them. So that's the North Channel Naval Duel. How are you feeling about that one?
Impressed. I'm very impressed. The one thing that keeps going through my mind is how before the battle, John Paul Jones took his time. I think it seemed like there were 4 or 5 hours that transpired between when they could have begun the battle and then how he positioned himself for the favorable conditions, and then he attacked.
Yeah, well, that's half of the battle is just jockeying for position, for favorable position. The other half is actually shooting at each other.
Right. And I think those that have not been in the military or may not think about that aspect of the strategy involved and how long it can take, because you said the battle itself took just over an hour.
Yeah.
And that was just the shooting part, but most of the time was, I'm going to get in position so that when it comes down to it, it'll be done quickly.
Right. It took them about 2 hours to maneuver, to meet, to declare hostilities, and then start the fight.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm sure we'll see this as we go through the Revolutionary War, but just kind of what a great way for America to kick it off. You know what I mean?
Yes, this was a very, very influential American victory. So that's going to bring us to the Battle of Flamborough Head.
Oh, yes.
This was between the U.S. and with U.S. and France versus the U.K. The commander on the U.S. and France's side was John Paul Jones, and the commander on the U.K. side was Richard Pearson. This was actually a pretty big battle. There was 1 schooner, 1 brig, 2 frigates, and an unidentified ship on the U.S. side. And on the UK side, 1 fifth-rate man of war and 1 sloop of war. So, during September of 1779, there were 4 vessels that remained from a 7-vessel-strong squadron that left Groix off L'Orient in France on August 14th. This was under the command of John Paul Jones, and he was going pretty much around the UK, just trying to create as much havoc as he can. He went up to Ireland, over to Scotland, down the East Coast, just, nanny nanny boo boo. Now, they were sailing under the U.S. flag, but all the vessels are actually loaned or donated by France.
I did not know that.
And they had French captains, except for one, which was the Alliance, and this had been built in Amberley, Massachusetts, specifically for the Continental Navy. And it was still captained by a Frenchman, though. And he was not happy about John Paul Jones being in charge.
Yeah, that sounds like a French attitude.
Yes. The crews, they had American, French, and British sailors. The British were captured by Americans, and they were offered to get a chance out of captivity by, serving aboard an American vessel.
Okay.
So, on the evening of September 22nd, Jones, who was aboard the Bohum Richard, was accompanied by a small brig, the Vengeance, and they were off of Spurn Head. They were trying to capture, or they wanted to try to capture a few prizes that came from the Humber estuary. But he ended up deciding to go north when darkness fell, and to rendezvous with his frigates, the Alliance and Pallas, which had, separated from them further up the coast. Shortly after midnight, 2 vessels were seen. So they put up the signal lanterns, and the 2 vessels did not give them a response that would identify them as his 2 other vessels. So he called general quarters. And when daylight approached at around 05:30, there was a checkered flag hoisted on the mizzenmast. And they finally figured out who these vessels were. It was the Alliance and the Pallas.
So, do they have a checkered flag typically, or is that a more common naval flag that indicates something else?
Though they use different flags for different communications, and then they would say, hey, this means that we're part of the same squadron. This flag means we're part of the same squadron. And then later they could say, okay, this flag now means that the captain has diarrhea or something,
Well, that's a very flexible communication and flags. It's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, you'd set these before the rules
Yeah,
before using them.
yeah, I gotcha.
The captains of the other boats had actually said, if these guys were not British, we need to get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Which, to John Paul Jones is like, well, this isn't good because, these are like one of the best, these are some of the best ships out here. And, these guys are much more maneuverable. We need them. So, that's the British. I mean, so the French weren't happy with John Paul Jones, and John Paul Jones were not happy with the French.
Makes sense.
So early in that afternoon, once all the confusion was done and they had like, oh, we're all friends, yay, they saw a brig in Bridleton Bay. So at around 1530, a small schooner that they had actually just captured the previous day was sent to the brig with a 15-man boarding party. Now, there is some confusion about why they sent this schooner, but it wasn't because the brig was in very shallow water, but because the main squadron was on its way to investigate a sighting of a ship further north, near Flamborough Head. So shortly after they sent that schooner ahead, Alliance, who had been a bit ahead of the others, hoisted a signal and then went to full speed. They raised full sails and started going. They saw two large vessels in the distance. So they immediately recalled the schooner by firing a signal gun, and the entire squadron set sail towards these two boats. So a little bit about the boats that they saw. September 15th, there was a convoy of over 50 ships.
Whoa.
That had been trading with ports in the Baltic and had set sail from a meeting place off of the Norwegian coast at the mouth of the Skagerrak Channel to cross to the North Sea. Different ships did leave before Britain came into sight because they were heading for other ports such as Leith and the River Tyne. But when they came into sight of the Yorkshire coast on September 23rd, there were still a little bit over 40 still in the convoy. A lot of them carrying timber and iron, and they were bound for ports all around the southern half of the British Isle. They were going from Hull and Bristol and Waterford in Ireland. Now, the convoy did receive warning from Scarborough that there was an enemy squadron in the vicinity. A number of ships ignored the signals that their escort ship, the HMS Serpetus, fired to say, hey, guys, stay close so I can protect you. I am the one with 44 guns.
Right.
So early in the afternoon, as they approached Flamborough Head, the lookouts of the ships in the front saw danger in Burlington Bay. They started to tack very quickly and attempted to run for Scarborough. Seppers put on all of her sails, so full speed ahead, to get between the merchant vessels and who they thought were probably the Americans. And there was another boat, which was smaller, called the Countess of Scarborough. She stayed with the colony and, shepherded the sheep, the water sheep.
Well, that's good. I mean, if you're able to divide it up that way, that's probably best.
Yeah. So at around 1600, with the convoy to their north and the possible bad guys to their south, the captain of the Serpius, guy named Richard Pearson, signaled the Countess to come on back. We are going to go fight. So as the squadron caught up to the Royal Navy vessels, they made sure to position themselves so that the possible enemy could not sail around them very easily and, reach the merchant ships. So as the Alliance is in the lead, they are taking stock of the situation and see what's going on. They start slowing down because we need to let the rest of the fleet catch up to us.
Smart.
Except for the itty bitty schooner, because they just weren't fast enough. So at around 1800, Commodore Jones ordered Paulus to ride directly in his wake. So right behind him.
Oh.
And this was to confuse the other team about the strength of his squadron.
That's very clever.
About half an hour later, he hoisted signals ordering all of his vessels to form a single file line of battle. This was to make best use of the broadsides as they passed by the two British ships. Captain Landis, who, according to him, had a lot of formal training in naval leadership and tactics, so he decided he was going to do something different.
Oh, no.
He used Alliance's superior handling to sail off to one side against the wind. And in order to prevent them from sailing right past and chasing the convoy, Captain Thomas Piercy of the Countess of Scarborough had to do the same thing, which left Serpius alone with the remaining 3 ships of the American fleet. So about an hour later, the Bohom Richard was within pistol shot of the Serpius. Now that the dark was falling, Pearson hailed the potentially, quote-unquote, hostile ship to ask a few questions. The standard questions are, hey, what's your name of the boat? And where you from? Things of that nature.
Yeah, like a dating app.
The answer was a couple of evasive answers. And it was either, we're not sure, it was either followed by a pistol shot or a broadside.
That's a very firm way to say, leave me alone.
Well, it's a firm way of saying, we're your enemy.
Oh.
And we just got the first shot off at you, dummies.
Yeah, that too.
But the Serpius was ready. She answered with a broadside of her own. A couple minutes later, Landis was within range and fired his own broadside at the Countess of Scarborough. And Percy, of course, was also ready, and he replied very soon afterwards.
All right.
So here's what we're going to do. The battle has started, and we're going to finish it next week.
Oh, cliffhanger.
We're going to finish this battle next time. So if you want to know what happens, you got to come back.
Yeah. Don't even mess with like the library or internet. This right here, this podcast is the source for the conclusion of this story.
All right. So at the end of every episode, we like to honor one of our fallen heroes. And we're going to honor someone from the Army today. We are going to honor Captain Daniel Nimham. His hometown was Fishkill, New York, and he served in the Continental Army. His unit was the Stockbridge Indian Company, and his date of sacrifice was August 31st, 1778. Killed in action in Cortlands Ridge, New York. He was 52 years old, approximately. Daniel Nimham was a diplomat, a warrior, and the last leader of the Whippinger tribe in New York's Hudson Valley. He was fighting for the British in the French and Indian War and against them in the Revolutionary War. Nimham was commissioned as captain in the Continental Army, and he was with General George Washington at Valley Forge, and later gave his life for the American cause, refusing to surrender in the Battle of King's Bridge. Prior to the Revolutionary War, the Whippinger people lived along the eastern banks of the Hudson River from New York's Manhattan Island to Connecticut. In most Algonquian languages, Wappinger can be translated as Easterner. Their name for what was later called the Hudson River was Muhianatuck, or the river that flows both ways, because of the incoming flow of the ocean tide against the river's natural current. The Wappinger people lived in seasonal camps, regularly moving to following the changing availability of fish, game, and plant life, and later developing the practice of agriculture, such as beans, corn, squash, sunflower, and tobacco. They had established temporary settlements along the Hudson, sometimes surrounded by a wooden palisade, which was defensive walls made of tree trunks. Through the 16 and 1700s, the region hosted a variety of native tribes, including Munsee, also called the Lenape, the Mohawk, smaller bands, Africans, and Dutch traders. And according to the National Park Service, the relationships between these groups range from cooperative trade to exploitive slavery and outright warfare. As war, epidemic diseases, and intermingling with other area tribes reduced the Wappingers' numbers to the hundreds, Daniel Needham was born sometime around 1726. Different cultures colliding, trading, adapting to each other was commonplace in the region. And by the mid-1700s, Needham had encountered European settlers of the valley as a young man. He learned English and kept friendly relations with them. As an adult, he became the Sockham of his people. As an experienced warrior and diplomat, Needham and some 300 Wappinger men fought for British during the French and Indian War. At this time, New York and Connecticut were colonies under the British Crown. Needham and the Wappinger people became embroiled in a dispute with the family of Adolphus Phillipse, who was a wealthy New York City merchant who made a expended land claim into Wappinger territory. Daniel Needham had developed a reputation for diplomacy and traveled to England to petition his case. Returning home, his case had come before the New York Common Council in 1765. According to the American Battlefield Trust, quote, with a questionable deed presented by the defendant and hesitance to set an adverse precedent, the council ruled against Needham and the Wappinger. Having fought for the British Crown, the decision left a bitter taste in the mouths of the Wappingers. When the colonies revolted against England and declared independence on July 4th, 1776, Daniel Needham and his people joined the cause. He saw the value of the patriot cause and likely understood the possibility of negotiating the return of Wappinger land if he was to fight alongside the colonists. Needham was given a commission as a captain in the Continental Army. He was an essential force for the American cause, having recruited warriors from native communities stretching from Canada to the Ohio Valley. Daniel's son, Abraham Needham, was given command of the 60-man Stockbridge Indian Company, based out of Stockbridge, Massachusetts. A Hessen officer, Johann von Ewald, recalled, quote, their costume was of a shirt of coarse linen down to the knees, long trousers also of linen down to the feet, on which they wore shoes of deerskin, and the head was covered with a hat made of bast, or plant fiber. Yeah. Their weapons were a rifle or musket, a quiver with some 20 arrows, and a short battle axe, which they knew how to throw very skillfully. Through the nose and in the ears they wore rings, and on their heads only the hair of the crown remained standing in a circle the size of a dollar piece, the remainder being shaved off bare. They pull out with their pincers all the hairs of the beard as well as those on all other parts of the body.
Whoa.
When the fighting began, Daniel Needham joined his son's Stockbridge Company militia scouts. Daniel and Abraham served alongside General George Washington at Valley Forge and fought in the Battle of Saratoga and in the fighting at Cambridge, Massachusetts. They also supported troops led by General Marquis de Lafayette. Serving under Virginian General Charles Scott in 1778, the Stockbridge Militia Company was assigned to patrol the northern border of New York City, which was then controlled by the British, and gather intelligence on enemy movements. On August 20th, 1778, the Stockbridge Company ambushed a British force north of New York City, killing one light cavalryman and wounding another. News of the attack spread, and the British put together a force of 500 British regular troops, Hessians, and Loyalists. On August 31st, 1778, the British set a trap for the Stockbridge militia on Cortlandt Ridge, in what is today the Bronx of New York City. Nimham's 60 warriors were drawn into the open upon sighting a group of Hessian forces, and British Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe's light infantry struck and hit the Stockbridge Company's left flank. Surrounded and outnumbered more than 8-1, the Stockbridge Company fought back in hand-to-hand combat. Simcoe later described the bloody scene that became known as the Battle of Kingsbridge, or the Stockbridge Massacre. Quote, "The Indians fought most gallantly. They pulled more than one of the cavalry from their horses." Simcoe recounted that Daniel Nimham called out to his warriors that, quote, "he was old and would stand and die there." He was cut down and killed by Private Edward Wright, a British light cavalryman. Abraham Nimham would also be lost in New York City's Van Cortlandt Park. A Chief Nimham Memorial Monument has been placed on the field where the Wappinger, now called Stockbridge, warriors gave their lives for the American cause. In Putnam County, New York, overlooking the Hudson River, Mount Nimham has been named in his honor. In the town of Fishkill, New York, sculptor Michael Kiropane was commissioned to create a bronze statue of the great Wappinger Sachem, Daniel Nimham. The statue standing on the Wappinger's ancestral land was dedicated in a ceremony on June 11th, 2022. After American independence was won, General Washington wrote that the Stockbridge remained firmly attached to us and have fought and bled by our side, that we consider them as friends and brothers. With so many Stockbridge men lost, growth for the tribe was difficult. Despite their service in the Continental Army and their friendship and alliance, land pressures continued after the Revolutionary War. Survivors and families of the fallen Stockbridge Company combined with other native tribes and moved to Wyandotte County in mid-state New York. When construction of the Erie Canal began after the War of 1812, land pressures again forced the Stockbridge to migrate, this time to Boulder, Wisconsin, 60 miles northwest of Green Bay. The Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohawken Indians is now federally recognized as an American Indian nation. So, Captain Daniel Nimham, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, XO, please kindly take us out.
All right. Well, again, thank you, listeners, for indulging us in this review of our history and joining us on the journey to find out more about what happened. If you want to learn more, if you want to contact us, you can certainly do so. The email address is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We are also on x.com or Twitter, however you prefer to say it. I've heard it both ways. At USN History Pod. You can tweet us there or post us there, whatever you want to call that.
We can call it Zwitter.
Zwitter. Ooh, let's do that. We may start a trend. You may join us on Zwitter. Additionally, if you'd like to join our Discord, please do. You can interact with other listeners and us and tell us what you really think. Finally, we are on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, I don't need to tell you this. If you're not listening on YouTube, I'll say, hey, you can also listen to us on YouTube instead of your regular podcast app. Wherever you're at, please rate us. Give us some feedback so we know how to improve, or just celebrate the greatness that you already listened to. Either way, we're good. So thank you very much again, and back to you, Captain.
Well, that's going to be it for us today. We're going to wish you guys a fair winds and following seas. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
U.S. Naval History Podcast. Departing.